Balderdash, based on the classic parlor game Fictionary, is a board game in which the player must, for tactical purposes, fabricate the definitions of various words. On a fundamental level, the dynamics by which the game operates can perhaps be best understood on an ideological basis, in the Zizek'ian sense, of course, where ideology is best understood as the spontaneous manifestation of what is essentially psychological phenomena in response to systemic presuppositions, which at its core constitutes all ideological beliefs. This spontaneous activity is gamified and turned into happenstance fodder, as it were, for the constitutive units that constitute the Balderdash schema. Oh, wait. Excuse me. So, I'm supposed to be talking about Bandersnatch in this video, not Balderdash. Oh, this is embarrassing. Hold on just a minute. Fucking. Why does Balderdash? Hello, and welcome to Nightmare Masterclass. My name is David Stockdale. I'll be your host on this excursion into the dark unknown. In this installment, I'll be talking about the latest Black Mirror production, a choose-your-own-adventure movie by the name of Bandersnatch. The movie follows a young programmer, Stefan, who sets out to adapt a choose-your-own-adventure novel into a computer game. If you haven't seen the film, you should probably check it out prior to watching this video. It's definitely an experience. I will at the very least say that. Anyway, you can consider this your official spoiler warning. As you might have guessed based on the title of this video, I have a problem with Bandersnatch. A few problems, in fact. Let's talk about it. You know, I don't like making videos in which the predominant activity is criticizing a work, although I have done it before. But it's just not really in my temperament, and this is something I'd probably let go if it weren't indicative of certain problems that increasingly seem to be endemic with respect to Black Mirror, sci-fi, horror, and storytelling in general. But it is, so here we are. See, Black Mirror's formula is essentially this: come up with some weird technological concept and offer the viewer a twisted hypothetical in which the societal implications of said concept play out. It's a tried and tested formula that often works. I mean, I'm a fan of Black Mirror. Whenever a new season comes out, I usually watch the whole thing over the course of a weekend. The formula doesn't always produce stellar results, but when it does, it really works. At its absolute best, I would say that Black Mirror doesn't merely say, hey, check out this weird new technology. Isn't that weird? Rather, it situates the technology in a particular time and place and demonstrates how the power dynamics in this hypothetical society work in relation to said technology, often producing bizarre and unexpected results. And in doing so, the show often offers a sort of critical perspective on certain aspects of our own society. The surveillance state, the gamification of various aspects of our culture, the dynamics of social capital that come about through the increasingly ubiquitous use of social media, etc., etc. The thing about Bandersnatch is that it isn't some novel technology that serves as the subject matter here, at least not directly. In this case, it's actually the plot device itself, the choose-your-own-adventure dynamic, that is interrogated in a self-referential sort of way throughout the work. And I, for one, commend the creators of Black Mirror for this departure, or at least the basic concept of departing from their usual shtick. The idea itself is ambitious, and it's something quite different from their ordinary formula. So kudos to them for trying to change it up. On that note, let me just point out some of the other more positive aspects of the work before I really get into the meat of my critique, because I really do think it's praiseworthy in many respects. For one, the acting by all parties involved was fantastic. In particular, I found the acting of the lead, Fionn Whitehead. I'm sorry, I don't know how to say his name. The guy who played Stefan, as well as Craig Parkinson, who played his father, to be impressive. especially considering the various scenarios they had to play out. And the transitions that occur when viewers are prompted to make their various choices are totally seamless. It's really a feat of cinematic innovation in this regard, and while of course video games have been doing this sort of thing for years, perhaps this little narrative experiment will bring choose-your-own-adventure type productions into the mainstream. But in my view, Bandersnatch goes a bit off the rails, and I also think there are a few missed opportunities with this cinematic endeavor. So let's get into it. The longest branch of Bandersnatch's decision tree amounts to a 90-minute runtime. That's a feature-length movie that's more than enough time to have a fleshed-out, dynamic protagonist with clear motivations, someone we the viewers can sympathize with on a human level. While it is clear to me that some attempt at a dynamic, thoroughly fleshed-out protagonist was made, I don't think it was successful. I would say Stefan is a relatively uninteresting character with some rudimentary surface-level psychological issues. There's some played-out Freudian stuff going on with his deceased mother and a stuffed rabbit. I couldn't bring myself to really care about this all that much, and of course, we could speculate about why it is that this protagonist is not adequately developed. My guess would be that the film is really trying to do too many things at once. It's juggling all these narrative branches, and as a result, the story, or stories, as it were, get all muddled in a sort of arbitrary complexity that doesn't really serve any greater purpose. I mean, what might we conceivably say Bandersnatch is about at its core? Free will, mental illness, the nature of reality, the inequitable power dynamic between the viewer and the protagonist, the manner in which authoritative parental figures set up certain toxic patterns? I don't really know. If you have a good answer for that, I'd like to hear it. But also, please tell me why I'm supposed to care, because I don't really think any one of these themes I've mentioned above is sufficiently fleshed out or really even explored all that much. It's like a pastiche of every postmodern cliche imaginable. What substance there is on screen is cheap and largely contingent upon this whole choose-your-own-adventure mechanic. I am tempted to say the whole thing was a bit of a gimmick. There's a distinct sort of bleakness that pervades the narrative. I think this gives an illusion of depth to the work that might make the viewer think there's some kind of meaning or thematic significance at the core of this thing. But I'm coming to the conclusion that it's really just a self-referential kind of circle jerk. The novelty of this choose-your-own-adventure mechanic doesn't make up for a story that lacks substance. You know, since there's such an emphasis on this dynamic, the manner in which Bandersnatch really fails on a very basic level of storytelling is all the more disappointing. The proliferation of Easter eggs and self-references in Bandersnatch is, let's not knock it too much. It's fun, right? It's clever, and catching these various Easter eggs makes you feel like you're a part of a really elaborate inside joke. But again, this self-referential quality, while the execution of it is often very clever, it simply doesn't make up for a story that lacks substance. And this is a bit of an aside, but I should note that certain branches in the decision tree end with Stefan having a nervous breakdown and killing his father. Of course, there is also the eccentric author of the novel Bandersnatch who, it is relayed, went insane and beheaded his wife. I'm growing increasingly tired of mental illness being displayed in this cartoonish manner. These sorts of stories all too often fetishize the issue in a way that is not only hacky and over the top, I think it's actively detrimental to the sort of attitudes we have about mental illness. Why is it that whenever a character with some mental illness is depicted, they always end up being a murderer or something? Not only is this inflammatory, it's also just lazy writing. I think it's something writers fall back on when they don't have any good ideas about how the story should go. And of course, Bandersnatch is not the only film guilty of this, but I just thought I would put that out there. You might point out that the viewer is the one controlling the protagonist's actions. I think this is a bit of a cop-out though, since it is, in fact, the writers who fabricate the scope of possible outcomes here. The central point of thematic resonance for Bandersnatch is the nature in which this choose-your-own-adventure dynamic tends to pervade the narrative itself, causing the protagonist to question his own free will. He seems to feel compelled by something outside of himself that makes his decisions for him. He has the sneaking suspicion that someone else is controlling his actions. In this respect, we might consider Bandersnatch to be a work of postmodernism. After all, a broad definition of postmodernism as offered by Jean-Francois Lyotard is a quote-unquote skepticism towards meta-narratives. With meta-narratives in this context referring to a kind of overarching way of understanding the world, an internally consistent system in which events can be contextualized. In this case, the libertarian notion of free will is one of the meta-narratives being called into question. Although, as to whether it really is being seriously called into question here is up for debate. I would argue not really. But the film definitely exudes a certain skeptical and perhaps even relativistic position towards grand overarching narratives, what with its various branches of narrative possibilities, each one bleaker than the last. I go into more depth about modernism and postmodernism in my video about Doki Doki Literature Club, so check that out if you're interested. Ultimately, I view Bandersnatch as a self-indulgent, navel-gazing exercise in narrative gymnastics. The work itself does not merit the level of attention it has generated. To clarify, my problem with Bandersnatch isn't that it's a work of postmodernism. I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. It's more so the vulgar, watered-down form of postmodernism that Bandersnatch adheres to. I mean, we're not exactly talking about Gravity's Rainbow here. Bandersnatch is a reiteration of an extremely surface-level, almost caricatured version of postmodern works. I think people have seen this type of thing so often that they mistake bleakness for philosophical depth or thematic richness in a work, and that is a huge problem. I think we're at a point in society where almost any positive vision for how the system should work is met with total cynicism. Not skepticism, because that entails some level of a critical process. Instead, any kind of positive vision for the future is shut down, ridiculed, met with irony and nihilism, and I think that's reflected in pop culture. In this case, it's reflected in Bandersnatch. This postmodern sensibility, or at least this watered-down form of it, really has outlived its appeal. I really do think we need to see more stories that go beyond the bounds of postmodern sensibilities. If not for the sake of cohesion, then certainly for the sake of, not rehashing the same nihilistic, self-referential product over and over again. That wraps it up for this installment of Nightmare Masterclass. If you enjoy my videos and have a few bucks to spare, please consider supporting me on ko-fi.com/Nightmare Masterclass. Please know that any donation, large or small, would be highly appreciated. Thank you for watching, and good night.